You've arrived at CozySideAudio, where dreams begin with a story. Tonight's tale is here to help you wind down and find peace. If this brings you comfort, please like, share, and subscribe so more dreamers can join us. Let the night carry you, and let's begin. CozySideAudio presents The Sunlight Cafeteria. Chapter 1, Where the Light First Lands. Most students at Yutori High didn't even know the old greenhouse existed. It sat behind the gymnasium, tucked beyond a slope where wild grass swayed chest-high in the spring. Teachers called it off-limits, though no one had really bothered to lock the door in years. It had become one of those forgotten places, the kind that linger in the corner of your eye, gathering silence like dust. But Himari Fuse noticed everything. She was the type of girl who walked home by the river just to count the ducks. She tucked sweet notes into her friends' lockers, handwritten, and always signed with the doodle of a smiling pancake. She collected odd smells in her memory like most people collected songs: the toasted sugar of festival stands, the citrus clean breeze before typhoons, the warm nutty aroma of her grandfather's old cardigan. So when sunlight hit the greenhouse just right that Thursday afternoon, Himari stopped. She was on her way home with 2 bags from the corner market swinging from her arms, one of them stuffed with bruised strawberries from the clearance bin. The other carried cream, eggs, and exactly 1 lemon, slightly overripe, but still fragrant enough to remind her of summer picnics. As she passed the slope behind the gym, a glint of light flickered across her eyes. She turned. The greenhouse shimmered. Glass panes that should have been dusty now caught the sun like stained glass windows. Something about the way the light pooled across the door made the air feel different. Hazy, warmer than it should have been for early April. Curiosity tugged at her feet. She climbed the grassy incline, careful not to crush the dandelions poking through, and stood before the heavy greenhouse door. Its iron handle, once rusted over, now looked polished, like someone had just scrubbed it clean. When she reached for it, her fingertips buzzed. The moment her hand touched metal, the door sighed open with a soft exhale, and warm air spilled out, curling around her cheeks and wrists like the steam from a teacup. The scent hit her instantly: vanilla, oranges, and something buttery baking just out of reach. She stepped inside, and everything changed. The world tilted gently sideways, not in a dizzying way, but in the way dreams often begin without you noticing. Gone were the broken floor tiles and cobwebbed corners she'd expected. Instead, the space glowed with late afternoon sunlight streaming through spotless glass. Polished wooden floorboards stretched beneath her sneakers, smooth and honey-colored. Floating shelves lined the walls, each stacked with old cookbooks, potted herbs, and glowing jars that pulsed like fireflies. A chandelier of teacups hung from the ceiling, gently rotating on unseen strings. Copper pots hovered midair near the stove, bobbing like sleepy balloons. A kettle whistled softly even though no one had touched it. Steam spiraled upward in little heart-shaped puffs. At the center of it all stood a counter, wide and welcoming, its surface worn like it had caught 100 elbows and 1,000 secrets. Himari blinked. This is not what I expected. She took a cautious step forward, her shoes making the faintest sound against the wood. Then another. A breeze drifted through the glass panels above, and tiny wind chimes hidden in the rafters tinkled in response. On one of the tables, a vase of pale blue flowers leaned toward her as if greeting her. She laughed softly. Okay, this is officially magical. A soft rustle answered her from the corner. She turned and found a cat. Not just any cat. This one had snowy white fur that shimmered faintly with golden undertones, like cream splashed with sunlight. Its eyes were amber and too intelligent for comfort, and its tail curled in slow, thoughtful loops. Hi there, Himari whispered, crouching down. The cat blinked. It didn't meow. Instead, it gave her a small, satisfied nod, then padded forward and rubbed against her shin as if she'd passed some invisible test. The moment their contact broke, a small chalkboard appeared over the counter, floating an inch above the wood. The handwriting across it sparkled faintly. Sunlight Cafeteria staff wanted, must love sunlight. Apply within. Himari stared. And then she laughed. A bright, unguarded sound that filled the warm space like cinnamon on a cold morning. She placed her bags on the counter and looked around again. The smells, the sights, the little magical oddities. It all felt like the inside of a storybook, one written just for her. "I don't know what this place is," she said to the cat, "but I want to stay." The rest of the afternoon passed like a dream, gently unfolding. Himari wandered through the cafe-turned-greenhouse-turned-magic sanctuary, discovering things that didn't make sense but didn't need to. A cookbook opened itself when she approached, its pages flipping to a strawberry tart recipe she'd once tried and failed to make for her younger sister's birthday. The pantry door opened not with a creak, but with a soft harp sound, revealing rows of ingredients she hadn't bought but somehow knew how to use. There were jars of honey labeled Golden Hour, and flour that smelled faintly like old memories. A mixing bowl stirred itself when she whispered softly to it. Everything responded to warmth, not just physical but emotional. This place wasn't powered by electricity. It was powered by comfort. And somehow it knew her. She tied her hair back with the scrunchie on her wrist, slipped on an apron that floated off a hook toward her, and got to work. She peeled the strawberries gently, humming under her breath. She whipped cream, folded the batter, lined a tart tin with buttery dough. Each movement felt guided, like a breeze was helping her along. As the tart baked, the smell filled the air, rich and sweet, like warmth had a flavor. As she leaned against the counter, sipping orange blossom tea that had poured itself, the cat hopped up beside her. "You're part of this place too, huh?" she asked. The cat, regal as royalty, blinked once. Okay, Himari said. "You can be manager." A soft purring buzzed in approval. By the time the tart was done, the sun had lowered toward the mountains. The light grew more golden, more tender. Outside the glass walls, cherry blossoms had begun to fall in lazy spirals, some petals sticking against the panes like watercolor kisses. She plated a slice, dusted it with sugar, and left it on the window table. She didn't know who it was for. Maybe someone would find this place tomorrow. Maybe someone needed that kind of sweetness today. But leaving it there felt right. Before she left, she scribbled her name on a piece of parchment from the guest ledger, another item that had appeared of its own accord, and tucked it under the chalkboard sign. Himari Fuse. Available after school. Loves sunshine and strawberries. Can bake? The moment her pen lifted, the chalkboard's letters shimmered again. "Welcome, Himari. You're exactly who we needed." She stepped back into the real world just as the light faded from the door. The moment she passed the threshold, the greenhouse behind her flickered, and looked exactly as it had that morning. Dusty, cracked, forgotten. But Himari smiled to herself as she held the still-warm tart in its parchment bundle. Because she knew better now. Tomorrow she'd come back. And the day after. And maybe, just maybe, she'd bring someone with her. Chapter 2, Sugar, Spice, and a Hello. Himari woke up the next morning with the smell of vanilla still in her hair and the faintest dusting of sugar on her wrist. It wasn't a dream. The tart she'd brought home was real. She'd shared it with her little sister, who'd lit up with the kind of smile that only dessert could coax out of a middle schooler mid-exam season. Her mom had asked where she bought it. "Somewhere warm," Himari had said with a mysterious grin, and that was that. By lunchtime, she couldn't sit still. The classroom buzzed with chatter and fluorescent lighting, but her mind was back in that glowing greenhouse, already imagining what today's pantry might reveal. Would there be blueberries this time? Maybe lavender? Maybe something even stranger? The final bell rang, and she bolted like her feet had wings. She reached the greenhouse breathless, her school bag bouncing against her side. Sunlight filtered through the trees, just beginning to lower, casting golden strips across the grass. The door waited, still ordinary, still rusted, but when she touched the handle, it warmed beneath her palm like a greeting. Inside, the cafe welcomed her back like it had missed her. Sunlight spilled through the panes in soft patches, illuminating every corner in a low golden glow. The air smelled like cardamom and rising dough. Her shoes tapped gently on the wood floor as she walked to the counter, where the chalkboard floated again, this time with a note. "Let the light choose who enters. Prepare something sweet." She smiled. "You got it, boss." The cat, who she had now mentally named Yuzu after the citrusy scent that always seemed to follow him, watched her from the windowsill, flicking his tail like a metronome. Himari rolled up her sleeves and headed into the pantry. This time, the shelves had changed again. The top row shimmered with small jars labeled in delicate handwriting: cinnamon smiles, giggly ginger, peppery courage, and tender nutmeg. She reached for the cinnamon and paused. Next to it sat something glowing softly. A single bottle filled with tiny sugar crystals that sparkled like stars. The label read, "Belonging." She didn't know how she knew, but this was exactly the flavor she needed today. Back in the kitchen, Himari got to work. Flour sifted itself into a mixing bowl, golden butter cubes hopped into the batter, and egg yolk spun into spirals under her whisk. She giggled as she stirred in a pinch of the glowing, belonging sugar. She didn't have a recipe exactly, but the café seemed to guide her like a warm hand on her shoulder. The result was a small tray of shortbread sandwich cookies, soft, slightly chewy, filled with a spiced caramel cream and rolled in crushed hazelnuts. They smelled like something between a family reunion and a hug on a hard day. Just as she placed them on the windowsill to cool, the bell over the door jingled. She froze. Someone had entered. He stood in the doorway like he wasn't sure he was allowed to be there. Tall, sharp-edged, and quiet as mist, the boy wore the Yutori High uniform with the collar slightly undone. His dark hair was windswept, his shoes caked with dried mud. His eyes, cool gray like the sky before it rains, scanned the room slowly, taking in every detail like it might vanish. Himari blinked. She recognized him. Now Asakura, the new transfer student. Word was he barely talked to anyone. He sat in the back row and spent his free time sketching strange little scenes in the margins of his notes. No one had seen him smile. Until now. A very faint, barely there smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "This isn't the greenhouse," he said softly. Himari stepped out from behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "It is. Just not all the time." He glanced around again. "Am I trespassing?" "Only if you hate sunshine," she said with a grin. "Otherwise, welcome to Sunlight Cafeteria." There was a long pause. Then Nao's gaze landed on the cookies. "Those smell like the kitchen from my old apartment." Himari's heart flipped a little. "The cafe does that," she said. "It gives you what you need." "I didn't know I needed this." Most people don't until they walk through the door. She placed the cookie in his hand, warm and crumbly. As soon as his fingers brushed it, something seemed to settle in the air, like the room had exhaled. He took a bite. The expression on his face didn't change much, but something shifted in his eyes. A softening, a memory. "My mom used to bake these when I had bad days." Himari said nothing. She let the cookie do the talking. He looked at her for a moment, really looked, like he was trying to see past her freckles and flour-dusted cheeks and into the gears of her mind. "You made this without a recipe?" "I think the place helps. It's kind of alive. Just a little." He didn't laugh. He didn't doubt her. Instead, he stepped toward the counter, set his sketchbook down, and rolled up his sleeves. "Teach me," he said. They cooked together in near silence, but it was a comfortable quiet, the kind that grows between people who don't need to fill space with noise. Himari showed him how to whip cream without overdoing it. Now showed her how to slice fruit like a pro, precise, beautiful, like tiny stained glass windows. They moved around each other like they'd been working side by side for years. At one point, he paused, holding up a jar labeled bittersweet. "Do you think this belongs in a tart?" Himari tilted her head. "Only if you're okay with feelings getting mixed in." He smiled, not fully, but enough to make the air feel warmer. "I'm used to that." As the sun dipped lower, casting apricot light across the cafe walls, they sat at the counter with 2 mugs of cinnamon cocoa and the last 2 cookies. Yuzu leapt onto Nao's lap without hesitation and curled into a sleepy ball. Nao didn't flinch. He scratched behind the cat's ears and sipped his cocoa. "This place," he said quietly. "It's not just magic, is it?" "No," Himari said. "It's a kind of kindness. The kind that shows up when you need it, even if you don't ask." He nodded slowly, then pushed his sketchbook toward her. On the page, he had drawn the interior of the cafe, down to the floating teacups and the exact tilt of sunlight through the window. But in the corner there was a detail that surprised her. 2 figures. One with soft curls and flower-streaked cheeks. the other with storm gray eyes and hands holding a spoon like a pencil. Together. Is this us? She asked. He nodded again. I think I was supposed to come here. She smiled and took another sip of cocoa. Then you're hired. That night, the door closed behind them as the last light faded from the sky. The greenhouse returned to its dusty, forgotten shell, but the warmth followed them all the way home. Somewhere in the pantry, a new label formed on a high shelf. Trust, just beginning. Chapter 3, Tomatoes That Tickle the Sky. There was a tomato on the roof. Himari spotted it as she turned the corner behind the gym, squinting up into the late afternoon sun. Just sitting there. Round, red, and very much out of place, perched on the edge of the greenhouse like it had grown wings and flown there itself. She blinked, then laughed. Of course. It was her third afternoon returning to Sunlight Cafeteria, and already she'd stopped questioning the weird. Weird, after all, had its own logic here. Things appeared where they were needed. Flavors followed feelings. Pantry shelves reorganized themselves while no one was looking. Still, a tomato on the roof was a new one. She climbed the slope with careful steps, feeling the spring breeze rustle her skirt and send the scent of fresh grass into the air. When she touched the greenhouse door, it buzzed warmly under her fingertips, like greeting an old friend. Inside, sunlight greeted her like a hug. It spilled across the polished wooden floor in gentle stripes, catching on the glass jars that lined the windowsills. Everything smelled of basil, garlic, and baking dough, a savory kind of comfort today, like the café had shifted into lunch mode. Himari dropped her school bag behind the counter and headed straight for the pantry. It greeted her with a little chime and a puff of oregano-scented air. But today the pantry was different. It was bigger. Where before there had been neat rows of jars and hanging herbs, now the shelves stretched impossibly high, vanishing into a glowing mist above. Wooden ladders rolled themselves gently along the rails. Some jars floated in midair like balloons. In one corner, a tiny spiral staircase led to a loft stacked with baskets of bread and glowing fruit. And right in the middle of it all was a boy, half inside a burlap sack. Himari said cautiously. Do you need help? Or is this a new shelf arrangement I haven't learned yet? The boy yelped, flailed wildly, and promptly knocked over a crate of cherry tomatoes, which spilled across the floor like marbles. Oh no. He scrambled up, sending more jars rolling. The tomatoes scattered in every direction. One bounced off a shelf, ricocheted off a spice tin, and landed perfectly in Himari's outstretched hand. She raised an eyebrow. The boy straightened, cheeks flushed, hair messy like he just walked through a wind tunnel. He wore the same uniform as her, though with the tie slightly askew and one shoelace dragging. I'm okay, he said, breathless. Totally fine. Nothing broke. Probably. There was a pause. Then the boy stuck out his hand. I'm Tomo Kajiwara, he said brightly. I think I work here now. As it turned out, Tomo had been following a trail of floating tomatoes when he stumbled through the greenhouse door. He'd been chasing a white cat carrying an entire bag of basil in its mouth and accidentally wandered into the pantry mid-shift. I swear the ladder moved on its own, he said, rubbing his elbow. And one of the jars sang to me. Is that normal? Himari grinned. That's pretty average for a Thursday. Yuzu sat smugly on the counter behind them, licking his paws as if he hadn't just lured someone into magical employment. Tomo had already unpacked his bag and rearranged the pantry alphabetically by scent. He'd labeled every mystery spice with question marks and drawn smiley faces on the onions. I'm not really great at cooking, he admitted, bouncing on his heels as they prepared for the day's first guest. But I love ingredients. I collect weird salts. You're hired, Himari said immediately. Now, who had been quietly slicing herbs by the window, glanced over. Is this how you staff the cafe? Just whoever walks through the door. It hasn't failed me yet, Himari replied cheerfully. The three of them spent the afternoon experimenting. Tomo unearthed a strange, flat-leaf plant from the back of the pantry that tasted like sweet corn when dried and like black pepper when fresh. Now discovered a batch of heirloom tomatoes that only ripen when someone nearby was telling the truth. Himari mixed the sauce so rich it made them all feel like they were sitting in a summer garden with cicadas singing nearby. They decided on a dish of rustic bruschetta, toasted bread made from flour labeled lazy Sundays, topped with sliced truth tomatoes, whipped ricotta, and a drizzle of basil syrup that smelled like clean laughter. Just as they finished plating the first test dish, the doorbell jingled. Their first guest of the day. She was maybe 19, dressed in a delivery uniform, hair tied back in a tired ponytail, helmet still under one arm. Her eyes were distant, like they'd been looking at the road too long. She hesitated in the doorway. "Am I allowed to come in?" "Of course," Himari said gently. "The light let you in. That means you needed to." The girl's shoulders dropped just slightly. She sat down at a window table and stared out at the breeze playing through the ivy vines. "Long day?" Now asked, setting a water glass down beside her. "Long week," she murmured. "I think I forgot what warm food tastes like." Within minutes, her plate arrived, carried gently on a floating tray. She stared at it, blinked once, and then took a bite. Her eyes filled instantly with tears. She chewed slowly as though trying to memorize it. Then she let out a breath that sounded like it had been waiting for days. "This," she whispered. "This tastes like the backyard when I was little. When my mom used to grow tomatoes and I thought they were magic." "They were," Himari said, placing a napkin at her side. "You just forgot." When the guest left, they found a tip in the form of a tiny handwritten note. "I remembered who I used to be. Thank you." Tomo read it aloud and blinked fast. "People leave notes like this?" "All the time," Himari said. He glanced down at his ink-smudged hands at the pantry behind him, now glowing a little warmer. "Then I want to stay." Now looked at him, his expression unreadable, then gave a small nod of approval. "We could use someone who can chase tomatoes up ladders." "I was born for this," Tomo said seriously. Yusu leapt onto his head like a crown. The sun dipped lower and the air cooled into soft gold. As they cleaned the cafe together, laughing, sweeping, sampling the leftover syrup from wooden spoons, something settled quietly into place. 3 students, 1 cat, a greenhouse that wasn't always what it seemed, and the kind of belonging that sneaks up on you while your hands are sticky and your heart is full. Chapter 4. Rain in a Teacup. It was raining, but only inside the cafe. Thin mist curled through the rafters like a sigh, and tiny droplets fell from the ceiling beams, not onto the floor, but into suspended saucers that hovered gently in the air. Outside, sunlight still glowed through the greenhouse glass in soft amber sheets. Birds chirped. Bees buzzed in the rosemary by the sill. But inside it rained. Now held out his palm and caught a cool drop. It shimmered for a moment like melted glass before vanishing into his skin. "This place gets mood swings," he murmured. Himari giggled from behind the counter as she kneaded dough with lavender lace flour. "I think it mirrors the guests sometimes. Someone must be feeling rainy today." Tomo peeked out from behind the pantry door with a daisy stuck in his hair and a spoon in his mouth. "It's moody weather for baking. I like it." Yuzu trotted across the windowsill, tail swishing. The cat had knocked over a potted mint plant earlier and now smelled like wild herbs and mischief. Everything felt soft, slow, like the air itself had tucked itself into a cardigan. The cafe had taken on a new shape since the day before. The floating shelves now hung lower, holding delicate pastel teacups that shimmered like seashells. The tables had changed to circular ones, each covered in cloths patterned with constellations. Overhead, string lights had twisted themselves into hanging loops of soft yellow stars. And in the corner by the window, something new had appeared. A chair, woven from vines and willow branches, draped in moss. In the center sat a single, untouched cup of tea. Steam rose slowly from it like a message unsent. "Did one of us put that there?" Himari asked, wiping her hands. Tomo shook his head. Now didn't answer, but his gaze lingered on the empty chair. Then the bell above the door jingled. They all turned. A girl stood there, so quiet, so still, she looked like she'd been painted into the doorway. Long black hair dripped water down her shoulders, despite the dry day outside. Her eyes, large and pale, flicked from the chandelier to the steam to the empty chair, and then slowly back to them. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You didn't," Himari said, stepping forward. "The cafe invited you." The girl hesitated. "Even when I don't bring color?" The question hung in the air like fog. Then Tomo stepped forward, smile bright. We've got cookies that don't need color. And soup that hums. You in?" She blinked, then nodded. Her name was Miko Kabe. She spoke so quietly they had to lean in to hear her. She moved carefully like someone trying not to knock over the air. Her uniform was tidy. Her nails were painted with tiny water droplets. She carried a sketchbook tied closed with a blue ribbon. "I haven't been able to see color in a long time," she admitted, once seated by the willow chair. "Ever since last year." "What happened?" Himari asked gently. Mika paused. "I used to draw every day. I painted our school's mural. People said I had a gift for color. But then I stopped seeing it. I wake up and everything is just gray. Not black and white. Just dull. As if everything turned to pencil lead." They listened. "Now set down a pot of ginger tea." Tomo brought out a plate of lemon sugar cookies that shimmered faintly. Himari refilled the hanging saucers with flower petals. "But this place," Mika murmured. "It smells like color." It was now who brewed the first tea for her. He stood by the herb table, hands steady, eyes focused. He chose 3 leaves from a plant labeled Nostalgia, 2 sprigs of lemon balm, and a pinch of blue flower petals that glowed only when touched by someone truthful. He steeped them slowly, humming under his breath, as if calling something back. When he placed the cup before her, it shimmered like a summer puddle. Mika lifted it carefully. The moment it touched her lips, her eyes fluttered shut. "It tastes like being 8, she whispered. "And sitting in the grass. My dad painting the fence. My dog barking. The way everything felt brighter even when it was cloudy." Then for the first time she smiled. It was small, but it was real. Later she opened her sketchbook. Every page was blank. Then she pulled a pencil from her sleeve and drew one thing, a teacup filled with swirling rain. Beneath it, the faintest hint of a yellow light. The beginning of a glow. "Can I stay?" she asked. Himari blinked in surprise. "Here? In the cafe?" Mika nodded. "I think the rain's been waiting for me to come back." They let her decorate the wall behind the counter. Over the course of the afternoon, Mika filled it with flowers made from paper and real petals, intertwined with sketches of clouds, moons, and tiny umbrellas. Every time she drew a line, a little more color returned to her cheeks. And when she brewed her own tea, a blend of hibiscus, orange peel, and something labeled Gentle Defiance, the steam curled into the shape of a paintbrush. Himari leaned over her shoulder. "That smells like courage." "I think I'll need some," Mika whispered. That night, before they closed up, Mika left a single flower on the willow chair. It bloomed bright pink as soon as she touched it. Then the rain stopped, the saucers floated upward and disappeared into the ceiling, and the cafe gave a quiet sigh of contentment. Yuzu stretched across the counter and purred. Outside, the world was still dry. Birds still sang. But Mika looked up and gasped. "The sakura petals," she whispered. "They're pink." She turned to them, eyes wide with wonder. "I can see color again." Chapter 5, The Tart with a Gentle Heart. Now didn't talk much while he baked. He moved like a pencil sketch in motion, quiet, precise, all calm lines and deliberate softness. While Himari danced from shelf to shelf and Tomo narrated every sprinkle of salt like a sports announcer, now simply worked. He didn't need to taste things, he felt them. Every flavor had a shape to him. Every herb had a mood. Cinnamon curled in spirals. Honey felt like a hand brushing your hair. Today he was making tart shells. The cafe had shifted again overnight, adjusting with the breeze. Now it was all warm woods and scattered orange light, like late autumn come early. The scent of pears drifted in from somewhere unseen. Himari leaned over the prep counter. Tarts again. Now didn't look up. "There's a guest coming." "You always say that." "They always show up." He cracked an egg. The yolk shimmered slightly blue, which meant the guest was still grieving. He added a dash of remembering and just a pinch of letting go. Mika stood nearby stringing tea bags on a clothesline. Each one was labeled with a single word, patience, wonder, almost, and shimmered when the light touched them. Her fingertips still bore smudges of charcoal from the mural she was sketching onto the pantry wall. Tomo returned from the herb loft carrying a crate of whispering plums. "They're gossiping about someone named June," he reported. Apparently she was a peach. No idea what that means, Himari said, handing him a bowl of ginger cream. Neither do they apparently, he shrugged. Yusu swatted a falling teabag out of the air with bored elegance. Then the bell jingled. She stepped in without a sound. A woman in her 40s, dressed in a dark suit, with her hair pulled into a neat twist. Her face was pale, eyes rimmed red. Her hands trembled just slightly as she held onto a handkerchief. She looked around the cafe slowly, like she'd wandered into the wrong place or maybe the place she'd needed for years. Would you like to sit by the window? Himari asked softly. The woman nodded but said nothing. She moved like someone underwater. Mika brought her tea. A blend of blue flowers, lemon balm, and crushed rose hips. Comfort wrapped in steam. Lost someone? Mika asked, voice low but not pitying. The woman's eyes welled, and she nodded again. My mother. This morning. They served the tart 20 minutes later. Now had filled it with soft almond custard and poached pear slices arranged in a quiet spiral. On top, he'd laid a delicate sugar glaze made from a rare syrup labeled last words unspoken. He placed the plate in front of her without explanation. The woman stared at it. Then slowly she picked up the fork and took a bite. First nothing. Then her shoulders shook. Not a sob. Not quite. Just the sound of someone exhaling 20 years of silence. It tastes like when I was 10, she said quietly. And she let me skip school because I hated Mondays. She made me a tart just like this. I didn't even know I remembered. Now said nothing. He simply placed a second fork on the table and walked away. The woman stayed long after the tart was gone. She stared out the window, cradling her tea like a candle. Then finally she stood, straightened her coat, and placed a photo frame on the table. Inside was a small black and white image of a woman with a pie in her hands and laughter in her eyes. Leave her here a while, she whispered. Let her sit in the sun. Later, after the door closed and the cafe sighed its quiet breath, Himari found now on the back steps, sketching. He was drawing tarts. Rows and rows of them, each one slightly different. Notes in the margins. For grief, for guilt, for the quiet ones, for me. You okay? She asked. He shrugged. I don't talk about my dad, but I bake him into things sometimes. Do they help? A little. Himari sat beside him, watching the wind curl through the grass. I think the cafe listens to you more than anyone. He smiled faintly. It listens to all of us. I just hear it back. They sat in silence. A warm silence. One filled with the smell of pears, old memories, and soft healing. Inside, the photo frame shimmered faintly. The woman's laughter echoed through the air for just a second, like a bird darting past a window. Yuzu purred on the counter, tail curled around a new label on the syrup shelf. Closure gently offered. Chapter 6. Sleepy Stars and Secret Smiles. The cafe knew when to go quiet. Not just still, but soft. Hushed. Like the entire space was holding its breath under moonlight. That evening, the sunlight faded earlier than usual, replaced by a velvety dusk that came like a secret. The greenhouse panes darkened slowly, and the wind outside settled into a whisper. The usual golden light dimmed to a deep blue glow, and candles began lighting themselves one by one in windows, on shelves, under tables, flickering gently like stars winking into existence. Inside, the cafe felt like a sky turned upside down. Mika stood on a stool near the pantry, stringing up a row of small glass orbs filled with drifting stardust. She worked carefully, tying each with a ribbon of midnight blue silk. They'll catch the sleepiness before it spills, she said. Tomo, half asleep in a hammock that had appeared between two posts, murmured, too late, already spilled some, zzz. Himari giggled as she swirled a pot of syrup on the stove. It smelled like roasted apples and warm milk. He's been drooping all day. I think it's the moon, Mika whispered. It's heavy tonight. Even now, normally silent but alert, was moving slower. His knife paused mid-slice as he leaned slightly against the counter, watching the candlelight flicker in the windowpane like he was thinking of someone far away. It was the kind of night that made you say too much or nothing at all. There were no guests that evening. The bell didn't ring. The wind didn't shift. Instead, the cafe offered a kind of lullaby. It spread out blankets woven with constellations and laid them across the floor. It warmed mugs without needing stoves. It opened the ceiling panel so the staff could look straight up into the stars, framed by the glass roof and wrapped in spring's cool breath. Mika brewed her favorite tea, a sleepy blend of anise, chamomile, and tiny dried apple stars. The teapot floated gently in midair, refilling cups without spilling a single drop. Himari passed around a plate of moon-shaped cookies dusted in powdered sugar and filled with lemon custard that glowed faintly. "For sweet dreams," she said. "Do we have a dream shelf yet?" Tomo yawned. "Bottom left in the pantry, behind the courage." "Oh yeah," he murmured, eyes closing. "That tracks." Now sat a little apart from the others, his sketchbook on his knees. He wasn't drawing food this time. He was sketching people. Himari curled up in a blanket with crumbs on her cheeks. Tomo sprawled across a pillow pile, one shoe still on, mumbling about comets. Mika sat with her knees to her chest, hair tucked behind her ears, the stardust lights painting freckles across her face that weren't really there. The lines were soft, gentle, like he was capturing something he didn't want to disturb. Himari noticed. Of course she did. She crawled closer, resting her chin on her arm, peering at the pages without saying a word. "You see us," she said quietly. Now didn't answer. He just flipped to a new page and began drawing again, this time a hand cradling a teacup. Not his own, not hers, but familiar in that way hands become once you've held them long enough in your imagination. It was late when the sky finally deepened into velvet black. The group lay beneath the stars in a slow sprawl, sipping tea and blinking heavy eyes. Then Mika, voice barely audible, asked, "Do you ever think we're not supposed to find this place? That it was meant for someone else?" There was a long pause. Then Now said, "I think we're all supposed to find it. Eventually. When we need it most." Himari nodded against her blanket. "It's like a heartbeat but made of cinnamon." "That doesn't make sense," Tomo mumbled. "It does if you believe in it," Mika said. A shooting star passed overhead. No one made a wish. They didn't need to. For a few soft moments, everything was right. After the lights dimmed and Yisu herded them gently out the door, Mika lingered behind, standing in the middle of the now empty cafe. She looked around at the floating lanterns, the blankets, the leftover teacups. Then she whispered something she hadn't said in over a year. "I feel okay." The candles flickered once. The chandelier above rang a single, quiet chime. And outside, as the door shut behind her, the moonlight curled around the cafe like a lullaby made just for 4 sleepy hearts. Chapter 7. Salted Caramel Promises. Rain tapped lightly against the greenhouse glass, but the cafe was warm. Not summer warm, not oven warm, blanket warm. The kind of warmth that wraps around your shoulders and says, "You're not alone anymore." Himari stood behind the counter with a wooden spoon between her fingers and caramel bubbling gently in the pot before her. The air smelled like toasted sugar and buttered vanilla, edged with just a whisper of salt. It curled around the cafe like a scent memory made solid. Tomo was behind the pantry door, reorganizing shelves that kept reordering themselves alphabetically by emotion. "Do we keep yearning next to yesterday or yum?" he called. "Put them next to maybe," Mika said, tracing new chalk illustrations onto the wall. She had drawn a caramel swirl the size of a sunflower, labeling it soft, golden, healing. Now sliced apples at the prep station, each piece a perfect crescent moon. "Someone's coming," he said quietly, not looking up. The bell hadn't rung yet, but the cafe already knew. When the door finally opened, it did so slowly, hesitantly, as if the air itself was unsure whether to let the person through. She was around their age, 17 or 18. Her black hoodie was soaked, the sleeves too long. One strap of her worn backpack dangled by threads. Her eyes were wary, the kind of tired that settles behind the ribs, deep and unshakable. In her hand was a folded envelope, wrinkled and unopened. She stood just inside the door, dripping onto the welcome mat. "I shouldn't be here," she murmured. "I didn't mean to end up here." "Most of us didn't," Himari said softly. "But it's okay. You're in the right place." The girl's lip trembled. She clutched the envelope tighter. And for a moment, just a heartbeat, she looked like she might turn and run. But then the scent of caramel hit her and her knees gave way. She sank onto the nearest bench like the weight of the whole world had finally said enough. They didn't ask questions. Not yet. Imari brought her a blanket, Mika placed a warm mug in her hands, and now handed her a small dish of salted caramel squares, soft and golden, each one tied with a silken ribbon of sweetness in something unspoken. The girl stared at them for a long moment, then picked one up. The moment it touched her tongue, her shoulders curled inward, and she let out a shaky breath that sounded like something cracking open from the inside. I haven't eaten anything warm in days. Her name was Ray. Or maybe that wasn't her real name, but it's what she offered. She sat at the counter, blanket over her shoulders, tea steaming gently beside her. Rain slid slowly down the glass walls of the cafe, blurring the view like tears that weren't hers to cry anymore. I left home, she said eventually. I was supposed to mail this. She held up the envelope, sealed but warped from water. A letter to my brother. I wrote it. I meant it. But I never sent it. Why not? Mika asked gently. Because I thought if I never sent it, I couldn't disappoint him again. No one said anything. The cafe didn't like to fill silences that needed to exist. Ray unwrapped another caramel and stared at it like it might whisper a solution. These taste like things I didn't get to say. That's kind of the idea, Himari said. The cafe gives you what you can't say out loud. Tomo pulled a small tray from the oven, humming softly. On it were new pastries, mini tartlets with sea salt woven into the crust, filled with caramel and dark chocolate, topped with candied orange peel that sparkled slightly in the candlelight. He set one in front of her. Promise food, he said. Ray blinked. Promise food. Something you eat when you're ready to forgive yourself. Or someone else. Even just a little. Ray looked down at the tart. Then carefully she opened the envelope. She didn't read it aloud, but her fingers trembled. And when she finished, she folded it again, then tucked it into the space between the salt jar and the sugar canister, like it belonged there. I'm not going home yet, she whispered. That's okay, Himari said. You don't have to send it yet, Mika added. You just have to want to now finished. Later, cafe shelves rearranged themselves again. The caramel jar glowed brighter. A new one appeared beside it, labeled Forgiving Yourself is Still Healing. Ray helped mop the floor. She didn't ask to stay. But the cafe laid out an apron just her size and placed it gently beside her when she wasn't looking. That night, as the last raindrops tapped against the glass, she sat on the counter beside Yuzu, sharing a final piece of salted caramel tart. Can I help make these tomorrow? She asked. Himari smiled, handing her a spoon. Only if you promise to taste the batter. Ray's eyes softened. I think I'm ready for that. Chapter 8. Butter and Bellflowers. The cafe smelled like butter from the moment the door creaked open. Not the loud kind of butter, the sizzling pan-fried noise that filled noisy kitchens, but the quiet kind. The kind that melts slowly into the folds of warm bread. The kind that settles into the air like a memory left on the edge of a windowsill. Outside, spring had fully taken hold. Wildflowers danced just beyond the greenhouse glass, tangled in soft morning breezes. Bees buzzed lazily through the clover. And inside, Sunlight Cafeteria bloomed in response, flower-dusted counters, floral garlands trailing across the rafters, and the soft sound of Mika's humming, winding through the rooms like wind chimes. Today felt like a page pressed between petals. And someone new was coming. Ray stood in the kitchen wearing her new apron cream-colored, stitched with tiny gold stars. She still didn't say much, but she smiled now. Not all the time. Just enough. She cracked eggs into a bowl like she was afraid they might break wrong. They'll be okay, Himari said, brushing flour from her cheek. Eggs are stronger than they look. Ray gave a short, quiet laugh. So am I, apparently. Across the room, Tomo and Yuzu were arranging breakfast trays. Fresh-baked rosemary biscuits, honey lavender scones, and a batch of cinnamon rolls that had baked themselves into heart shapes for no apparent reason. Who's our guest today? Mika asked, pouring lemon tea into flower-shaped cups. Now, already at the window, answered without turning. Someone who speaks in petals. The bell above the door chimed once, soft as a lullaby. The person who entered wasn't what anyone expected. A boy, maybe 15. pale, freckled, with a wreath of bellflowers nestled in his wild, coppery curls. His clothes looked handmade, stitched from linen, embroidered with little green vines. He carried a basket tucked in the crook of his arm, overflowing with herbs, flower bundles, and something glowing faintly gold beneath it all. He didn't speak when he entered. Instead, he walked up to the counter, placed the basket down, and reached into his pocket. From it, he pulled a single bluebell. He held it up like a question. Then, from behind the register, the cafe's chalkboard flickered and answered, "Welcome, Finch. We've been waiting." His name was Finch. He didn't speak aloud, but his hands told stories. His fingers danced in slow shapes, and his eyes sparkled with a secret language only nature seemed to understand. He passed them herbs like gifts, thyme for clarity, dill for joy, and a tiny bunch of dried lemon verbena tied in string, which made Mika sneeze and smile at the same time. Ray, unsure what to say, handed him a butter cookie. He smiled wider than any of them had seen yet. Now observed him for a long time, then brought over a glass teapot and opened the pantry door. "Let's see what blooms when he's near the leaves." Together, they brewed something that didn't have a name yet. A tea that glowed soft yellow and tasted like sun-dried sheets and quiet happiness. They served it in shallow bowls with candied violets floating on top. Finch sipped with reverence like it was sacred and offered a bundle of mint in return. The label on it changed as soon as he let go. Mint for shared language. The cafe shifted again. Flower vines trailed down the beams. Tiny bellflowers appeared along the baseboards. The entire pantry smelled of butter and new grass. Himari baked a cake with Finch's herbs, lemon thyme, sweet butter, and crushed petals that turned the batter a soft spring green. The frosting tasted faintly like the breeze through an orchard. She served it with a spoon carved from lavender wood. When Ray took her first bite, she blinked. "It tastes like someone finally believes in me." Finch handed her a single flower in response, a pink zinnia, which meant lasting affection. That afternoon, the cafe stayed quiet. They built flower crowns. They embroidered napkins with silly faces. Mika painted petals onto the windows and watched the sun make them glow. Ray sat beside Finch on the step near the garden and whispered, "I thought I didn't deserve soft things." Finch placed a daisy in her hair and shook his head. The wind carried the answer, "You do." When it was time to leave, Finch placed one final flower on the pantry door, a white bellflower. Its label formed slowly, gratitude in full bloom. Then he disappeared into the sunflowers, barefoot and smiling, the scent of butter and new beginnings trailing behind him. That night, Ray wrote a new letter. Not to her brother this time, just to herself. "I'm learning to stay soft," she wrote. And the cafe, humming faintly with floral magic, tucked her words between the pages of its recipe book. Chapter 9, The Window Seat with My Name on It. There was one spot in the cafe that always felt warmer than the rest. It sat under the far left greenhouse pane, where morning light filtered through creeping ivy and hit the wood just right. The old window bent the sunlight into amber and honey, casting everything beneath it in a lazy golden glow. The seat itself was half a bench, half a cushion pile, tucked into the wall like a secret meant only for someone who noticed. And lately that someone was Ray. She didn't sit there at first. At first, she floated between stations, folding napkins with Tomo, drying teacups with Mika, helping now arrange jars by scent. She stayed busy, polite, quiet, helpful, but never still. Even when she smiled, her fingers twitched, like she might lose her place if she stood still too long. Until one morning, Himari pressed a warm mug into her hands, cocoa, not tea, and gently nudged her toward the sunlight. "Just sit," she said. "No job today. Just be." Ray hesitated, then obeyed, and something inside her softened. Now the window seat had become hers. Not in a loud, possessive way, but the way a wild bird finds its favorite branch. Others still sat there sometimes, but the cafe knew. It fluffed the cushions for her, left her favorite spoon on the sill. Once the sunlight warmed her tea without oversteeping it. She never asked for those things. They just appeared. That morning, the sky was cloudless and the cafe smelled like strawberries and brown sugar. Tomo was making jam, and the sound of bubbling fruit drifted through the air like a melody. Mika painted pale watercolors along the wall, mugs, flowers, falling petals, now had vanished into the pantry again. He said he was trying to listen for citrus. Ray sat in the window seat with a biscuit in one hand and a pen in the other. She was writing. Not a letter. Not this time. A list. Things I like now. The smell of sunwarm wood. The feeling after the second bite of something buttery. The way Himari always hums off key. When Yuzu climbs into my lap without asking. This seat. My name on something that stays. She paused, blinking down at her handwriting. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a slip of paper, a tiny pressed flower. The pink zinnia from Finch. She slid it into the journal crease and smiled. Himari plopped down beside her a few minutes later, her braid trailing flower dust. You look like a person who just figured out how to breathe through her ribs, she said. Ray laughed, surprised. That's weirdly accurate. Himari pulled her knees up. This seat suits you. It used to be shy, you know. Like it never wanted anyone to sit too long. Seats can be shy? Here they can. Later, while the others prepared lunch, Ray wandered into the back room. The pantry lights glowed low, humming softly. She touched one jar, then another, until her hand landed on a new label. Comfort in case you forget. Inside, sugar cubes. Just sugar. Nothing fancy. She took one and let it dissolve on her tongue like a secret she'd almost remembered. Then she walked back to the window, curled into her seat, and began to sketch the cafe in tiny lines. Teacups, spoons, shadows. Not perfect, but hers. That afternoon, a note appeared taped to the window. No one saw who left it. It was written in slanted, careful handwriting. The world spins fast. It's okay to stay still. Ray read it twice, then added it to her list. 7 words that let you breathe easier. The sun shifted. The cafe glowed deeper. And Ray, tucked into her sunbeam, finally let herself feel like part of the story, not just passing through it. Chapter 10. The Girl Who Brought the Storm. It started with the wind. Not the gentle spring breeze that usually played through the rosemary or nudged wind chimes into lazy song, but a rush, a whoosh, a gust that flung open the doors before the bell had the chance to chime. The cafe lights flickered. The tea jars rattled. And Yuzu, perched lazily on the windowsill, flattened his ears and bolted beneath a basket of napkins. Himari's ladle froze mid-stir. Oh, she said. The girl who entered did not walk, she arrived. Tallish. Tan. A mess of curls bleached in places like she'd stood too close to lightning. Her hoodie was 2 sizes too big and one sleeve was safety pinned up at the shoulder. She dragged behind her a duffel bag half unzipped, spilling notebooks, bracelets, socks, and a single rubber duck. She stopped in the middle of the cafe like she had no idea how she got there, wide-eyed, electric. Then she grinned. Yo, she said. What is this place and can I touch everything? By the time they caught up with her, she'd already opened 3 drawers, petted Yuzu, who hissed, then gave up, and tried to take a bite out of a floating lemon. Ray stood stunned near the counter, still holding a clean towel. Is she part of a weather system? Feels like it, Mika murmured. Tomo, amused, handed her a soda pop with a twisty straw. Here. It fizzes when you hold it too long. Oh, she said, staring as it changed color. Okay. I love this. Himari finally managed a breath. Welcome to the Sunlight Cafeteria. The girl dropped her bag. That's the best name I've ever heard. Her name was Kaoru. Or at least that's what she said. Whether it was her real name or a storm alias, no one knew, and no one asked. She talked like she was running out of time. Fidgeted. Danced. Spilled things by accident and apologized mid-laugh. She smelled faintly of ozone, basil, and bubblegum. Her socks didn't match. She sat on the counter until the cafe gently lifted her off and set her in a chair with invisible arms. I didn't mean to crash your vibe, Kaoru said, spinning her straw. I just kept walking. Couldn't stop. It felt like I was gonna explode if I didn't find somewhere quiet to land. You're in the right place, Ray said, surprising even herself. Kaoru turned to her. You're quiet. I used to be, Ray answered. Kaoru blinked. Then smiled. You're gonna be my anchor. I can tell. now made lemon tarts laced with calming sage and something called still wind. Mika floated a pitcher of watermelon mint cooler through the air on flower petals. Tomo lit a candle that burned blue and smelled like midnight. And Kaoru? Kaoru buzzed. Not literally, but emotionally. She touched everything twice, spoke in loops, pulled open the cupboard just to marvel at the labels: resilience, rescue, redemption, sweetened. I didn't run away, she said, pouring herself a glass with way too many ice cubes. I just couldn't be still. My brain doesn't know how to stop. Ray sat with her near the herb shelf. Kaoru kept bouncing her knee. Can I tell you a secret? Kaoru whispered. Ray nodded. I'm scared of being quiet, because sometimes the silence talks back. That made Ray pause. Then she reached for one of the cafe's smallest jars tucked behind the licorice root. It was pale green, unlabeled, and warm in her palm. She opened it and poured it into Kaoru's tea. The air around them shifted, just slightly. Kaoru sipped. Her knee stopped bouncing. Oh, she said. That's safe. That's what that tastes like, huh? Ray smiled. Later, Kaoru helped bake banana muffins, though she dropped 3 and accidentally used hope instead of honey. They came out better, Himari said, genuinely impressed. She drew stars on the windows with her fingers and told them stories of towns she never stayed in long, places that blinked past like headlights. People say I'm too much, she admitted, eyes on her mug. But being less makes me feel like I'm vanishing. Mika rested her head against Kaoru's shoulder. Here, you don't have to be more or less. Just be. That night, Kaoru curled up on the cafe couch with a pillow shaped like a cloud. Ray brought her a final treat, a small cookie topped with sea salt and dark chocolate, still warm. Kaoru took it in both hands. It tastes like staying, she said softly. Like maybe I don't have to leave yet. You don't, Ray whispered. The cafe rearranged itself again. The ceiling fan stopped spinning. The windows cracked just slightly, letting the fresh air in. And outside, the wind slowed for the first time all week. Chapter 11. Jam for the Days That Hurt. The cafe felt quieter that morning. Not empty, just slower. The kind of quiet that filled the corners instead of pressing on them. Outside, the clouds were low and soft, draped like folded blankets across the treetops. Birds trilled once, then went still again, like they knew something tender was about to begin. Ray stood in the kitchen, stirring jam. It wasn't even for a recipe, just something she'd started doing after Kaoru fell asleep on the windowsill with her face in a muffin. Something about jam felt safe, familiar, like it asked nothing of her but patience. The pot hissed softly as strawberries broke down in a pool of sugar and lemon zest. Beside her, a new stack of glass jars sat waiting. The lids were mismatched. The labels were blank. And yet the whole room smelled like memory and morning. Do you think it's okay to be this still? Ray asked. Himari peeked around the corner, flower on her cheek. Stillness is sacred, she said, especially after storms. Mika, sketching by the pantry wall, added, stillness is how we know where it hurts. The bell chimed low. A boy walked in, maybe 16. Pale hoodie, pockets stuffed with tissues. One hand clutched a folded paper towel where his sleeve should have been. His shoes were damp. His eyes red, not freshly crying, but like he'd been almost crying for days. He didn't look up, just shuffled to the nearest table and sat. Now passed Ray a small tin of clove and raspberry. This one, he said. For him. For now. Ray stepped out from behind the counter, jam still warm in the jar in her hands. She approached the boy slowly, gently, like someone setting a candle on a windowsill. No sudden movements. No questions. I made this just now, she said softly, holding the jar. It's still a little messy, but it's sweet. The boy looked up. Just a little. He took the jar, held it like it might break if he breathed too hard. Then whispered she used to make jam. Not like this, but it still smells like her kitchen. Ray nodded. Do you want to sit by the stove for a while? He did. They didn't speak much. She poured him tea that tasted like safe arms and apricot. Mika hummed quietly in the background. Tomo left a plate of toast and retreated without a word. And Ray sat beside him, letting the silence stretch without snapping. The boy held the jam close. I wasn't ready, he whispered. I thought we had more mornings. Ray didn't answer with words. She passed him a spoon. Let him taste it. Let him cry. By afternoon, the kitchen smelled like some warm sugar and new breath. The jam cooled in rows of jars labeled slowly by the cafe itself. Gentle memory, for the days that ate quietly, you don't have to be okay yet. Ray labeled one herself with a black marker, messy and a little smudged. To go with the letter you can't send yet. She placed it in the boy's hands as he stood at the door, still quiet but standing straighter. He gave a nod so small it barely happened. Then he left, carrying something warm. That evening, Ray sat back at her window seat, hands sticky with sugar, sleeves rolled. Imari leaned against the sill beside her. You're becoming part of the rhythm, she said. Ray smiled. I think I was always meant to. Outside, the clouds began to part. Inside, the last jar of jam glowed faintly on the windowsill. Not for a guest. For Ray. A label formed slowly, ink curling like steam. For the girl who stayed. Chapter 12. The Little Feast Before Goodbye. The table was too big. Not in a lonely way. In a way that invited leaning, laughing, spilling crumbs across napkins and stretching your legs while stories meandered across its surface like syrup over pancakes. The cafe had grown the table itself overnight. The wood was honey-colored and still smelled faintly of sawdust and sugar. A linen runner looped along its center like a lazy river, holding vases of floating lights, butter dishes shaped like acorns, and menus that rewrote themselves when you blinked. The chalkboard above the kitchen read simply, Tonight, the little feast. And beneath it, in smaller letters, glowing just slightly, Come hungry, come happy, come as you are. Kaoru was the first to bounce in, jacket already tied around her waist and her duffel bag neatly packed. I don't cry at goodbyes, she declared. I cry at, like, ads about bread. But this? I'm good. Her eyes were already shimmering. Mika wore a crown of violets and lemon balm. Tomo brought wild strawberries in a basket shaped like a teacup, now carved name cards out of toast. Ray made place settings out of dried herbs and twine, smiling the whole time without quite realizing it. The cafe dimmed the main lights and lit dozens of tiny candles, each flame different. Some pale blue, some flickering pink, a few that danced like fireflies caught in a dream. The kitchen glowed. The smells came slowly, one by one like instruments in a symphony. First, melted butter on roasted sweet potato. Then, lemon zest over fresh garden pasta. Then, tomato soup stirred with a spoon carved from cherry wood. Finally, warm pudding cakes with raspberry jam cores and powdered sugar snow. Every dish tasted like a goodbye that doesn't hurt. Kaoru twirled spaghetti onto her fork, her curls lit orange from the nearby candle. I've never stayed anywhere long enough for people to miss me, she said. You think I'll miss this place? You already do, Ray replied gently. Kaoru looked at her, then wiped her eyes with a napkin shaped like a bunny. I hate how good you've gotten at this, she sniffled. The laughter came easy after that. Mika told a story about the first time she burned water somehow. Tomo tried to juggle bread rolls and dropped them into a bowl of butter peas. Now allowed exactly one smile, which made everyone gasp like they'd seen a shooting star. Imari raised a toast with a teacup full of spiced pear cider. To the ones who arrive messy and leave glowing. Everyone drank. Even Yusu with a suspiciously full saucer of something golden and fizzy. When dessert arrived, puff pastries shaped like stars, filled with honey cream and candied lemon. Kaoru stood from her seat. Okay, she said. I have something. She reached into her bag, pulled out a slip of paper. It was wrinkled and doodled on, the corners bent, but she held it like treasure. I made this. For here. She set it on the counter, where the cafe's magic reached up like a ripple of wind. The paper settled, and a new label appeared on the highest pantry shelf. For the restless hearts who finally sat still. Later, after dishes were stacked and candle wax dripped into soft spirals, they stood at the door. Kaoru looked back only once. She grinned. I'll come back someday, she said. Even if just to eat everything again. You'll have a place, Ray said. Window seats still warm. Kaoru gave her a hug that smelled like rain and peppermint gum. Then she turned and vanished into the early night, curls bouncing, fireflies flickering in her wake. That night, the cafe was quieter, but not empty. The table stayed large. The tea stayed warm. And a new light glowed on the shelf, waiting for someone else, someday, who needed to find their way back to stillness. Chapter 13, and still the sunlight. Morning came slowly. The kind of morning that didn't rush. That let light spill lazily across the floorboards. That hummed through the window panes like a soft, familiar song. Ray sat in the window seat with a blanket around her shoulders, steam rising from her mug. Outside, the sky was pale and cloudless, and the cafe garden buzzed gently with bees and blooming rosemary. Inside, the kitchen was already alive. Tomo whisked batter without waking the house. Mika painted a teacup with edible gold leaf. Now stood in the pantry doorway, tasting a spoonful of pear jam with a faraway expression. It was a morning like so many others. And yet everything had changed. Ray closed her eyes. She remembered the first time she walked through the cafe door. Soaked, scared, clutching a letter she didn't send. The way Himari handed her a cup without asking a single question. How Mika drew her like she'd always known her face. How now, wordless and steady, made her feel visible without demanding anything. She remembered Keiru's storm energy, Finch's flower-laced silence, the boy who held a jar of jam like it might save him. And now here she was, not someone passing through, but someone who stayed. Yusu curled up in her lap, tail flicking. She scratched his ears and smiled. "It's okay if I go now, right?" He didn't answer, of course. But a small warmth stirred near her ankle, the cafe's way of nodding. Because Ray had made a decision. She wasn't leaving the cafe. She was taking it with her. Later that morning, they all sat in the sunroom, one final tea, one final toast. Ray stood, hands a little shaky but sure in her voice. "I'm going back," she said. "Home. Or to whatever's next. To talk to my brother. To maybe write my own recipes. To maybe open something quiet like this. But smaller. Just mine." Everyone was quiet for a beat. Then Himari clapped. Mika teared up. Tomo shouted, "Yes," and almost spilled a tray of scones. Even now allowed a tiny smile that felt bigger than a shout. "You'll take the warmth with you," Himari said. "And the pantry magic," Mika added. "And the jam," Tomo insisted. "You have to take the jam." Ray laughed. "I'll need all of it." She packed lightly. A notebook full of half-finished menus. A tin of dream leaf tea. A single flower petal from Finch's crown. A copy of the cafe's oldest recipe. Honeytime lemon cake with a note scribbled in Mika's handwriting. "Bake when missing us gets loud." She slipped it into her bag beside a tiny jar labeled Sunlight, just in case. At the door they stood together. Ray looked back once. The windows were glowing soft and golden. The cafe didn't say goodbye. It just let the light spill a little warmer for her. Months later, a new cafe opened on a quiet street, just 2 towns away. Tiny wooden with big windows and a cricket bell above the door. The sign read, "The window seat." Inside, the tea was never rushed. The seats were always warm. The air smelled like butter and soft beginnings. People wandered in without meaning to, left with peace in their pockets. And some nights, if the moon was just right, the sunlight stayed long after dusk, like it remembered the girl who once stayed, and everything she carried forward. Thanks for listening. Stay cozy, and I'll see you in the next story.